So, Devin, thank you so much for being a part of my podcast, Therapy for Guys. I'm so glad that we connected on Twitter, and I'm just really delighted to be here with you and to have this conversation about one of my favorite shows, Ted Lasso.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's always a joy to write something and then have someone connect with it because to have had this Ted Lasso piece that I loved writing, it doesn't always happen that you hear from people that it connected with them. So it's really just a pleasure to be able to talk to you about it and to know that one, you've read something I wrote, which is always exciting.
Yes.
Two, that it said something to you.
Oh, absolutely. No, it said quite a bit. And this is where I'm kind of conflicted. I can sit here all day and like critique social media and especially Twitter lately. But I guess what we're doing right now is maybe one thing that I'm grateful for in terms of the internet and social media is connecting with people, you don't know face to face and you get to access some of their material and have these conversations.
Yeah, it's wild how much of a hellhole we can have on social media, and then
Oh
you
my
have these
gosh.
beautiful pockets where something happens and you get to connect with someone, or you know, you I know for me, I'll connect with an editor and be like, "Hey, I'd love to write something for you," and that only happens because of this kind of nexus of insanity that yes is awful so much of the time, but man, it can be beautiful when it's great.
Absolutely. Now, I've got to say, I've recently started recording kind of the video on these podcasts, and I've got to say, I'm glad because you have incredible fucking hair, and I'm glad that my audience will get to enjoy that now, through the
Yeah,
YouTube.
yeah, I mean you as well. It's great when two of us guys with some swoopy hair can get together
Yeah,
and just understand on a soul level that this is how it should be.
absolutely. Now, I'm a little bit insecure right now because I actually am going after this to get my hair cut, so I don't have any
Oh
products or
yeah.
anything, so it's a little bit wild, but I'm actually really liking your look. It's good.
Oh, thank you. I got a haircut 3 days ago
Okay.
because I figured I should be as presentable as possible, and it had gotten long. I don't know if you ever get to the point where I would end up just like cutting around my ears because I
Uh,
needed to make it look sustainable for a little while longer. But man,
See,
we reached the breaking point.
because I'm OCD and kind of a perfectionist. I know this is a little embarrassing, but I have to get my hair cut every 2 weeks for that
Mm,
reason. I
that's the
can't, I
way to
can't, I can't, I
go.
can't stand the stuff behind my
Yeah,
ears.
I will probably get to that point.
Okay,
I just haven't yet.
there you go, there you go. Now, one thing I know, I don't think I mentioned this to you whenever we first connected on Twitter, but one interesting kind of connection from your story and mine a little bit is that my parents actually met in grad school at Middlebury.
Ah, no
Yeah,
way.
so it was really cool to see that you kind of studied there. And so I was just
Yeah,
hoping you'd just talk a little bit about your experience at Middlebury. I think that's a
yeah.
great place.
Well, I'm currently in Middlebury,
Oh, okay.
so we're bringing it right back. Yeah, so I currently work for Middlebury. A shout out to my wonderful bosses, Maggie and Betsy. If they end up
Nice.
listening to this, we love them both. But yeah, so I grew up in Maine, and then I knew I wanted to study film and English, and Middlebury just has a program in both of those departments that I was really excited by. And what I loved about the place so much is that I was able to really chart out my own path of
Mm,
study in that I was a joint major, which is a cool thing they do where it's basically a double major, but you get a little more freedom for requirements in terms of what you take. And I was really able to do a lot of the analytical work and a lot of the creative work because I think that for me, they feed into each other, right? So screenwriting and film
nice.
analysis, literary analysis, some poetry. Um, and since then, that's really led me along the way to I'm currently in a screenwriting master's degree and loving that. And I really owe that confidence in that creative pursuit to the time I spent at Middlebury. And it's a really small place. I made incredible friends because there's nothing else to fucking do except be with the people that you really
Right.
care about. Did your parents meet at language schools or Breadloaf?
Yes, yes. So my mom was at the time getting her master's in like Italian studies. And then
Hmm.
my dad was actually getting his master's in Spanish. down here at a university in Houston called Rice University,
Uh-huh.
and he was taking like one of their summer kind of courses, and so they met in a class together.
That's amazing.
So
Well,
yeah, so
there's
we
a
had,
whole thing about Middlebury marriages. It's a whole big
I
deal about
didn't.
how they're like, we have a higher percentage than anywhere else.
Oh,
So
that's I didn't know that. That's hilarious.
yeah, I think it's more about undergrad, but we'll take in the
Yeah, yeah,
graduate
no,
programs.
absolutely. No, that's great. So, okay, one of the things I love to ask my guests, kind of before we get into your awesome article on Ted Lasso, is in terms of your childhood, if we can go there just a little bit, would you mind maybe laying out whether it was like a philosophical framework or something spiritual, religious, or just values in general? Was there anything kind of growing up that was really important to you that you've kind of maintained now that kind of helps you think about how you see the world?
Yeah. So um, a thing I always say is important to know about me is that both my parents are psychotherapists.
Okay. Oh yeah, I
Um,
remember you saying
yeah,
that.
so that's me. No, but I go to that because I am the eldest of two kids.
Okay.
And as my brother Aiden and I have developed, I went very kind of arts analytical, and he's a neuroscience guy.
Oh
And
wow.
so I think we have taken the two sides of kind of the extremes, I think, in psychotherapy of the really unpacking analytical and the very biological side of things.
Sure.
And I trace that back to my parents. Um, we would spend Sundays reading books together when I was growing up, kind of out loud. Um, my mom is a huge movie person. My
Mm,
dad is a huge musician. So I think just kind of this openness to thinking about stories and art in a way that wasn't just it happens and it's done, but
okay.
okay, it happens, where did it come from, what's come after it, and how do we understand how this thing came to be. I just think that understanding that nothing happens in a vacuum and you can just sit and talk about it. And that probably connected to breakfast conversations about our dreams, because with therapist parents it just happens.
Oh,
um,
absolutely. Yeah,
so
in some
yeah.
ways, I feel bad for because so my I'm divorced and remarried, but in our blended family, my wife's a therapist as well. So we love to torture our kids and
Yeah,
analyze them and all
yeah.
kinds of
I
stuff.
I I want to start a support group,
Oh, there you
for
go.
children of therapists,
There you go.
where
If you do it online, I'll make them go.
yeah, great. We'll have we'll just do a Zoom room, pop in. It'll be great.
Okay, so Devin, but again, before we jump into Ted Lasso, I'm kind of having this question that I want to ask you since you're so into film. I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but just recently I've had this kind of obsession of wanting to go back to 1999 and rewatch
Yes, I've
some of the
seen.
okay, so some of the greatest movies
Yeah.
from 1999. I'm realizing a lot of them I hadn't seen before. So
Mhm.
can I put you on the spot? And if you don't feel comfortable, we can just skip it. But is there a movie from 1999 that you would say is your favorite that just really resonates with you?
Ooh.
I know that's a hard question.
Okay, this is the thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up my letterbox, shout out to my favorite app out
Okay.
there, to check the year 1999, because I always do this thing where I think about, okay, I love this movie from that year. And then I look back and think, oh my God, damn it, I forgot about this thing.
Oh yeah.
I want to double check so I
Sure.
don't
Oh,
spend
please.
the rest of the day kicking myself. Um, yeah, okay. This one's an easy answer, but I just wanted to make sure.
Okay.
Not to just pile on the therapy thing, but
No, but we're going to be doing a
um,
lot of that, so that's cool.
yeah, yeah. Um, a very formative movie for me is Analyze This.
Oh
Um,
yeah. See, I've
with
seen it, but it's been so long, I don't
Yeah,
remember it that well.
yeah. So for people who don't know, Analyze This, it's Robert De Niro plays a mob boss who starts suffering from some serious anxiety after one of his dear friends is murdered. And Billy Crystal plays a psychiatrist who he goes to see, who is about to get married and has some issues and neuroses of his own. And it is I think, hilarious comedy. And the first De Niro performance where he was poking fun at the really intense De Niro that came before. And then, in years after we've gotten all the shitty versions of De Niro making fun of himself, but like
Right.
analyze this as the text and the Crystal De Niro chemistry is sensational. It's directed by Harold Ramis, who also did Groundhog Day,
Oh
and
yeah.
it's a great comedy that I think has fallen by the wayside because it came out the same year as The Sopranos, and so I think that mob bosses in therapy kind of got blindsided by The Sopranos a little, which
Gotcha.
fair, but
Dude, I love The Sopranos.
yeah.
That could be a whole rabbit hole, so I'm gonna restrain
Pull back.
myself. Yeah, I
Yeah.
gotta pull back. Gotta pull back. Oh, okay. So great answer. In fact, I was asking my wife, what's the next one we have to watch, and so I think at least I've made the decision. I'll have to ask her, but Analyze This is one I need to watch
Yeah.
again.
It's always worth it.
Okay, awesome. Well, do you think it's a good time to just kind of jump into Ted Lasso and your article, The
Let's
Many
go.
Masculinities of Ted Lasso? And I'll go ahead and include the link in the show notes. So if anyone's listening or watching, they can go back, and I highly recommend that they read it. You basically just kind of explore, modern masculinity, some of the problematic aspects of it, but then just kind of look at the show and highlight some of the main masculine characters and just kind of riff on some of these concepts through, the story of the show, especially season 2, which I thought was really good.
Yeah, the idea for this, if you want me to do a little table setting for the
Please. I
article,
would love that. Thank you.
wonderful. So I have to say, when Ted Lasso first came out, right, as I think for a lot of people, I didn't really have a relationship to Ted as there was the NBC, I think it was NBC. They had the ads, and I remembered them, but I had put off watching it because I was like, why? And then I had
Sure.
a couple friends be like, you should watch it, and then I just fell in love with it. And one of the reasons I fell in love with it was this way that it remixed so much around masculine sports culture. I
Mm,
think especially in a 21st century America where kind of the gladiatorial norm of Sunday Night Football and this idea of just physical intensity as the only way to prove masculinity gets so wrapped up when it comes to sports.
oh yeah.
Um, and to have the show that, it's not like every muscular character is a jockey asshole or like everyone
Right.
who's thoughtful is this kind of like string bean. It's like it really, from that baseline of casting and character writing, it creates this really wonderful, I think, amalgamation of these different versions. And then kind of being drawn in by these different characters, like to think about how they will toy with expectations, like what you think Ted will be as this kind of goofy Southern guy. And then he has this very kind heart and also this penchant for some toxic positivity, which they
Yes. Well
explore
said.
later,
Yes.
right? And you have that there, and then someone like Roy Kent, who's the gruffest motherfucker ever, but
What
just
man,
is
graphist
so,
motherfucker. Yes, I love that way of
yeah,
putting it.
yeah. He's just wonderful. And then as you go down with Nate and with Sam and with Isaac and Higgins, and you just run down this list of characters that all have a different tweak on
Mm,
how they're engaging with this. And season 2 for me, I think really opened it up. If we're thinking that it's third season and done, season 2 is like it's the Empire Strikes Back of the
mm.
Ted Lasso verse, where it gets a little harder, it gets a little darker. We've gotten the fun and we've set it all up, and the fun is still there. But I think season 2 really pushed a lot of these norms and characters to say, okay, what happens now? What happens when we're past the just like getting to know each other, falling in love stage, and now we're in this,
Yeah.
and
It's like
what
shit's
goes
getting
on?
real.
Yeah, exactly.
So Devin, are you much of a sports person? Because that's something that I felt, a little bit insecure about, even in talking today, is I really don't watch sports that often. I
Mm-hmm.
can't say that I'm kind of a dude that watches sports, but I fucking love this show. So I was curious
Yeah,
if you were like a soccer fan already, or if that was a part of your psyche. Do you enjoy that world?
yeah. I grew up on baseball, like
Okay.
a good New England Boston Red Sox fan.
Boston Red Sox.
Um,
Okay.
uh, but I found soccer, I found football, soccer, however, wherever our listeners are.
Right, right.
Um, I found it through playing, starting in middle school,
Okay.
and I loved it. Um, and I had a really terrible back injury in high school that stopped the playing days, but I
Oh,
did go on to
geez.
ref and coach, and so soccer has been a big part of my life in different ways. And so it was actually the soccer of it that convinced me to give Ted Lasso a chance,
Okay.
because I was like, it's a soccer show. I have to, um, because I love it. And so, I was living a great life recently with the World Cup, but it's when I
Okay.
really get to thrive. That's when my most intense sports fan comes out. And my girlfriend Chelsea makes fun of me because she's like, Sports Devin doesn't come out very often, but it was intense for the last 6 weeks. And
That's
I was like,
awesome.
yeah, yeah. So I'm not, I don't think I'm a heavy sports fan in the more traditional American sense.
Okay.
As my side swipes at the NFL at the opening to this, I think, allude to. Um, but baseball and soccer mean a lot to me.
Okay. For me, so the show wasn't even on my radar. I don't think I had Apple Plus. Like I didn't have the subscription. And then, not being a sports person, I didn't really think about it. But I kind of have this weird rule for myself because I do watch a lot of like TV, probably way too much, that if one of my
Same.
clients, or if at least five of my clients recommends a show
Mm.
strongly and says you've got to watch this, it might even help our therapy, that I go ahead and just kind of drop things and watch it. And so I think it was like over 10 of my clients were like, have you seen this? Have you seen this? We think you're really going to love it. Like, some of the things you talk about remind us of this guy. Like, please watch it. And I was like, fine. And so I watched it and fell in love like
Yeah,
instantly. It was
yeah.
so
It's an easy one to fall for, I
yeah.
think, in how it. I mean, just from a writing and television structure perspective, I think
Yes.
it really blends a classical structure with some of these streaming developments I think that we've had, in terms of, sometimes when you get to streaming shows, it's really just, they're not thought about in these singular episode arcs all the
Mm,
time. They're just like, we're going to run it through this 8 episode thing, and we're going to chop it up so they fit into 8 episodes. And I think one of the things that first brought me into Ted Lasso is that once I was watching this reality that we kind of got back to this more classical sense of, you have your season long arcs, but these episodic arcs, and how you would kind of shift focus and go to different characters depending on the episode, while continuing everyone's threads.
yes.
And that's just great writing. And that's
Yeah.
writing that brings people in without being like, okay, we're going to watch 8 hours of this because who dies? Um, and I appreciate that, because it's an art form that, in the rash of peak TV, doesn't always get practiced the same way.
No, well said. Okay, Devin, I know that you'll be able to say this in a far more sophisticated way, having all the
Maybe.
knowledge in film and writing. But one of the things that strikes me about the show, I'll say it the way I understand it. Maybe you can kind of refine it. Is I feel like there's so many things happening. There's so many different arcs, but it doesn't feel like too much, and they're able to kind of weave everything together and tie things up. Not too like stereotypically, but I'm amazed at how much they're able to cover in so little time, but not make it feel like it's overwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would love to have been a fly on the wall in the writer's room
Oh,
when they were
wow.
charting this out, because, these ensemble shows so I'm somebody who, a very foundational show for me is The West Wing. And
Okay.
when I think of
I've
like,
never seen that. Do you
it's
recommend
great.
it?
I
Okay.
love it dearly. I mean, it's, there are aspects to it where it's like, oh yeah, this was written in 2000, and then we've come a different, it's a different political world.
Dude, going
Um,
back and watching some of these 1999 movies, I'm having the
yeah,
same like
yeah,
struggle.
it's a
Especially
real thing.
some of the social justice issues and stuff. It's like, oh my gosh, I forgot
Yeah,
how backwards we were. Although,
yeah,
shit, it seems like today we're not that progressed, but
yeah,
that's a whole nother
yeah.
thing.
That's another thing. Right. Yeah, I invoke The West Wing because it's kind of, for me, kind of the urtext of the modern ensemble show. And I think
Okay.
that while Ted Lasso is a different thing, you have this in one part workplace comedy, because it is,
Yeah.
even though if we don't think about it like that, but it's so many of the business side with Rebecca and Higgins, and we're getting that, and Ted and Beard and everything. And then you also have this kind of family style dramedy where it's very funny, but it's a very heavy show in a lot of ways. And so I think that those shows classically have these large ensembles where you're like, okay, these are our A plot protagonists for the week.
Mm.
And then we got the B plot where, like, maybe it's all about this other character trying to convince this person to do this thing. And then the C plot is just like, well, okay, this is a runner. This is a thing that's just popping along and, comes up every now and then. And I think that they take advantage of that really well because they have a stupidly talented cast
Okay. Yes, they
that
do.
can slot into all of these positions.
Mm.
And I think that from the top down, in the episodes that are more focused on, say, Sam or Nate or Rebecca, and Ted becomes a side character. And Jason Sudeikis can do that and be the
Mm.
scene partner who supports, just as he can be the person who holds the scene,
Yes.
but leaves space for someone else. And I think that kind of synergistic bit of the writing, directing, composition, and the acting, it's special when it's firing on all cylinders like that. And most of the time, I think Ted fires on all of them.
Oh, wow. Man, well said. Okay, here's kind of where I'm wanting to go, and I thought I knew I had a structure in my mind of kind of where I would take us, but I'm gonna
Uh-huh.
kind of do like a left turn in my own mind, which is because you seem to have so much knowledge around even the structure of things and your background. Could we look at Coach Beard and what he
Yeah.
has to say about masculinity? But even before that, what did you think of? I think it's episode 9 in season 2. I think it's like Coach Beard After Hours.
Yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
didn't like it the first time, but the second and third time, I think I grew to appreciate it. So I'm just curious where you take that question.
Yeah. Beard is an interesting character to me. I think because I'm forgetting the actor's name, and now I feel like an absolute fool. Um, because the point I'm trying to make
I have your
is
article right here. Let's
important.
see if you wrote it in there.
Brendan
I'm not
Hunt. There we go.
Brandon
Brendan
Hunt.
Hunt, who is
Yes.
also one of the creators of the show. And
Oh,
so I
that's
think
right.
that it's interesting because it seems like in season 1, he was like, okay, I helped create this. I'm going to be a side thing.
Sure.
And then they kind of, I think because he's such a fun guy, season 2 let him grow. And so the he as the counterpoint to Ted, as this kind of, if we're thinking in a traditional, Abbott and Costello
Sure.
model, Beard's the straight man to Ted's antics, I think,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. Um, and he's kind of this enigma. But that episode, the After Hours episode, which I just love that they decided to make a whole episode be a riff on a Marty Scorsese movie just in the middle of season 2. I was like, I
Yes.
don't know what's happening, but I'm really fucking happy that this is happening. Um, I think it's a really powerful bottle episode
Mm.
because of where it's placed. I think of the context of that moment where we've just had this loss, and one of my favorite scenes of season 2 where Roy and Jamie have their embrace after the just horror of Jamie's dad. Right,
Oh,
we've had
Man
this.
City. I love that scene.
Yeah, it's an incredible moment, and we want to get into everything else, and the show just slams the brakes and says,
And
we're
I
just
think
looking
too,
at Beard.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I
Now
think
go.
right before, Beard goes out and has his night, you have Ted Lasso calling Dr. Sharon, and I think for the first time mentioning that, a lot of his, let's say, trauma or just mental health struggles stem from his father dying by
Yeah.
suicide. And so I think it's a pivotal moment in that sense too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think while stylistically and storytelling wise, it's a departure from what the show does in a lot of ways. I think it fits in because Beard's whole journey in that thing is like, what if you're a guy who sits there and is open about a lot of things, but bottles up a lot because your best friend is trying to push for the dream and you want to support that dream,
Mm.
but then you're just kind of condensing and condensing. And I feel like that's the episode where Beard kind of, that bottling explodes.
Wow.
And he just seems to be in this moment. I think of the character arc, it's like, this is a guy who has committed himself to supporting Ted and Ted's dream because he's a part of it. It's not like Beard's on the outside, but he's definitely, as a theme that I'm sure we'll get into, is, you know, the way that characters push aside their needs for Ted's vision
Mm.
and how Ted slowly starts to recognize that. But Beard's journey being this, right, Odyssean, Scorsese-esque, however we want to frame it, journey through this dark night of both the city and the soul, I think, for
Yeah,
him.
dude,
And,
well
you know,
said.
and he comes out the other side just having learned, I think, more about what his limits are, both
Mm.
emotionally and I think physically. Yes. Beard has a tough go of it,
Oh yeah.
for
And
that
those
night.
pants.
Those pants, I want those
I
pants.
do
I
too.
love those pants. But
I
yeah, I
don't.
mean, Beard is a fascinating one.
Oh yeah. Real quick, I know that I've heard the concept of a bottle episode.
Yeah,
In fact, I know I've heard people talk about there's a famous one in The Sopranos. I don't remember exactly which number, which season, when they're in the woods, you know.
yeah,
Uh, would you mind just for the listeners explaining
yeah.
exactly what that is?
Yeah, so the idea of a bottle episode is for shows that are traditionally serialized, where week to week the stories are continued and impact each other very directly. The idea of a bottle episode is, okay, let's take one episode, one character or one location or something, and just kind of bottle it up. So it's happening on its own. And while it may have, you know, it's been led to by things that happened before and will have impacts after, it's not like any of the other ongoing storylines are approached in the
Okay.
episode. It's like you pull it out, and you know, one of the ones that had a lot of talk about it recently. Well, I say recently; it was a few years ago now, but in um, a season of Stranger Things, where Eleven goes up and meets her sister, and it's like this: we've pulled her
Oh
out of
yeah.
Hawkins, and it's storyline that's happening on its own. And while it does have impact, it doesn't majorly change anything. The same way, like there are a lot of impacts for Beard, but it doesn't really impact the rest of the season arc for Ted Lasso.
Got you.
And so that's the idea. It's like if we bottle it away and we get to do this thing on its own, it's usually where bigger risks get taken
Okay.
because people are like, okay, this is going to happen on its own. And like, we're
Mm.
not really going to talk about it again. So whatever happens here will happen, but we might not have to deal with it any other
Sure.
way.
Oh man, that was super helpful. Okay, David, I have two questions for you about Coach Beard. You know, I know it's going to be speculative, but I'm just curious what your take is. The first one is, what do you think he thinks about Ted Lasso,
Mm.
and why does he continue to kind of be his right hand guy? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I let me see, where do I want to start with this? I'm going to start on the right hand guy thing because I think the
Okay.
support of Ted Lasso part leads me into a related point,
Okay.
which will maybe slightly adjust the flow, but I think it's related. So I'm going to get
Okay.
there.
Yeah.
So I think on the right hand man, I think that, well, since I've already invoked the West Wing, there's a great exchange between two characters in the West Wing where one of them says to the other, well, that's the difference between you and I. You want to be the guy. I want to be the guy that the guy depends upon.
Mm.
And I think that that in some ways is the distinction between Beard and Ted. I think
Okay.
Ted wants to be the guy, and Beard wants to be the guy that the guy depends upon.
Yes.
And so I think in that sense that they found each other, and in that friendship of like Beard is more contained. He will be caring and funny if you get to know him. Whereas Ted's like, I am just extroversion everywhere,
Oh yeah.
always. And I want to step in and I want to be the leader who decides to fly across the ocean and
I've
big
got to have a
soccer
one
team.
liner for everything.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So I think that in terms of that structure, their personalities as they're written come together. And clearly, with the history that we get, in some ways, Beard has seen what Ted does and believes in this mission
Sure.
that Ted has. But I think that what season 2 does is it shows leading up to that after hours, after hours, and everything. I think that we see how the cracks have started, I
Mm.
think. And this would get into more of Ted's stuff, but I think a lot of what season 2 does is show how Ted failed Nate in a really intense way. And I think that Beard, while he doesn't get monologues or things, is someone who in moments nods to that. And I think that he seems to be struggling with the how do I handle when Ted really lets someone down like that?
Mm.
And I don't think that there's any mistake that the last shot of season 2 is clearly saying Nate's gone and Nate has gone to Rupert because of what Ted couldn't do or
Yeah.
did do that impacted negatively. And right, setting up, and also this week, I don't know if you saw, they released the first still from season 3, and it's
Oh man,
Ted,
I was
Nate.
fangirling. Oh yeah, dude.
Yeah.
What
And
is it with Nate's hair? I mean, it looks pretty good, but it's like he's like grayed so much.
yeah. Well, this is my okay. If you I have a Nate soapbox that made it
Oh,
into some of which made it into the article.
which can I say that was the part of the article that I think was most illuminating for me because I think before I read it, I had a very negative view of Nate. I think I was I can obsess about Ted Lasso, and there's a
Yeah.
part of me that's like, Nate, what the fuck are you bitching about?
Yeah.
Like I can't believe that you outed him and all this stuff. But I think you had such a great way of framing some of his behavior that I'm hoping we can get into.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the thing about Nate is I think that Nate is a capital T Aristotelian tragic
Mm,
character. Um, I mean, we don't know what will happen in season 3, but so far. And I think that a lot of that comes to if we think about Nate, and I would say Nate is the character I am most interested in when I think about Ted Lasso, both from a just the character perspective and the kind of analytical perspective, because
sure.
here's a guy who, when we start, he has only ever been belittled and looked over, right? He's the setup where, in that classical sense, he is the less fit, non-white guy on the sidelines
Right.
who just gets beat up on by all of these athletic, mostly white soccer jocks.
In some pretty
And
terrible ways, right? I mean,
yeah, in some
can we call it bullying?
awful ways. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's
Okay.
bullying. It's terrible.
It's fucking
And
horrible.
when Ted comes in and Ted sees him, and while we don't get this fill in until later, we understand that Nate has a very difficult relationship with his father, right? And you can see, I think, where there's an equal footing sense in the way that Ted treats Nate throughout
Mm,
season 1, but I think there's also that kind of paternal energy where Ted is this power figure who is validating Nate. And so Nate is just enamored by the fact that somebody is finally paying attention to him and telling him
yes.
that he's good.
Oh yeah. And that he
Um,
has tremendous potential and they're giving him a
yeah,
platform to sort of express it.
yeah. And I mean, that, I think what ends up being one of the most instructive scenes in season 1 is when he gives the pep talk to the team and he lays into people. And it's that, like, he's finding his voice and he's gotten that rush of,
Yes.
I can speak to power. I can speak to the power that was awful to me,
Mm,
um, because I'm good enough to take that stand. And so come into season 2, when some of it is, Nate trying to, I think, establish I'm here and I can stay here. And the modeling that he's gotten from so many people around him is that the only way to do that is to punch down.
mm,
And so that's what he starts doing. And I think where the failure from Ted comes in is that Ted does not engage with him on that. Ted brings Jamie back. Ted brings, for as much as we love him in so many ways, Roy back. Both people who were various degrees of awful to Nate. And two white men who Ted, in some ways, is placing added value on over Nate. And so I think that then you have this character who has been let down and bullied by so many people in his life, and he found Ted. And then it seems like Ted is abandoning him in favor of these other people. And so for me, that arc is about Nate just being heartbroken, just being absolutely devastated by what's happened. And Ted, up to this point, not, I think, fully recognizing or grappling with that. But if I'm putting it in context, right, and not to only pile on Ted, right, I think this idea of season one is about, this is Ted. This is baseline Ted. Season two is, let's break that down a little and what happens with the cracks. And I'm hoping that season three is Ted recognizing the good and the bad about himself. And fingers crossed, healing things with Nate.
Oh, I hope so.
Right, because that, I think that it makes, for me, they are the two, in so many ways, I think, the foils at this point of what can happen. I think, or maybe not foils, but the parallels of difficulty with fathers.
Yeah.
And in very different ways, but how all of this impacts them, and then how masculinity is modeled and how masculinity is injected into us from those around us. And so for all of the ways that Ted has a warmth and a really healthy masculinity that we should model and be happy about, it's not without flaws. And I don't think that takes away from the successes, but it's balance. It's
absolutely. Yeah. Well, to your point, you're hoping in season three, maybe there's some kind of reconciliation. I mean, I think where there's, real seeds of that even happening where it could blossom into something beautiful is, when Rebecca kind of screws him over in the beginning and she finally confesses, he takes it in and forgives her. I think he has the capacity to, move in that direction, which I'm hopeful about. And that is one of the things I loved about the show. The little that I've read about the writing process, they really did their research. I think they accessed someone down here at Houston who's pretty big, Brene Brown, who writes about vulnerability. I've said this before in other places. It sounds like name dropping, but I mean, I don't actually know the guy, but my therapist was mentored by an author who actually, one of his books gets mentioned in the show, James Hollis. Actually, in that episode, I think it's season 2, episode 8, the middle passage is the book that you see in Dr. Sharon's apartment for just like a split second. But they really, did their research on psychology and they're not fucking around. They're really exploring some really good stuff in this story form.
Yeah. And I think what's remarkable in so many ways about it is that it does all of this and people don't realize it's happening
Exactly.
all the time.
Yeah.
But it doesn't take away from it. I think that often we get projects that either overcorrect to we forgot about story and we've only decided on ideas. Or we get ones that are just like, we don't want to deal with ideas, and then gloss over it. And you have to find the best, or I think the best shows find that middle ground where your ideas are baked into your characters because of how you've written them, and it's baked into the concept because of how it's been presented.
Yes.
And Ted gets that, and Ted does it. And it's not without its stumbling blocks here and there.
Sure.
I still don't know exactly what they were trying to do with Rebecca and Sam, and I just hope we never talk about that again. But there are, for the most part, it really, it doesn't shy away, but it does so with with a charm and with a thoughtfulness
Oh yeah.
that is great. Also, I'm sorry, I don't know if you can hear that. Apparently, there's somebody working outside, and
Oh,
I
no
can
worries.
just hear a. I don't know if it's coming through,
Yeah.
but I can hear. I
Very,
can hear
very
it in my
faintly,
ear
but no, it's
faintly.
no.
Great. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's no problem. You know, I think I've mentioned this to my wife that there's very few shows that, you know, in one episode make me think very deeply. And then I love to go deep, but also make me cry and laugh
Hmm.
and just, you know, enjoy the action. And so I think it just has it all. That's one of the reasons I think it's
Yeah.
such a phenomenal show.
Yeah. It's. I love it. I love it, and I love getting people to give it a chance too. So
Yeah.
yeah, to give a story time turn. Yeah, imagine my dad, right, is a therapist, and a lot of my interest in looking at critical masculinity and thinking about how masculinity works comes from conversations with him and how he
Okay.
talked to me growing up about thinking about masculinity not as something that was just how it was being shoved in my face, but like
Like that
you should do that.
hegemonic masculinity that you
Yes,
write about.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. It's it was I was 13 and didn't have the words for thinking about the construct of masculinity in that same
Sure.
way. But he would say stuff like, you don't have to follow the boy code. We can talk
Mm.
about things. We can do this. And so when I watched Ted, and then I was like, Dad, you have to watch this show. And getting to watch it with him, rewatch it for me, him watching it and having these same experiences, I think
Oh,
that
wow.
it's opening. I just think the power that it can have to normalize throughout season two the idea that it can be hard to convince ourselves to go to therapy. It can be hard to convince ourselves to do that work, especially for men who will just suffer in silence a lot of
Yes.
the time.
Yes.
But that idea of this show and this season that is saying it's hard, but if you want to heal, you have to do it.
Mm.
And maybe it doesn't look exactly the same for everyone,
Right.
but starting that path, and that's about the characters. It's about Ted, who has lived his whole life trying to look out for the people who are bullied like him, to look out for the people who've lost people like him,
Mm.
but has never dealt with why. He's never dealt with why that has to happen. And so season two splits the, like, yeah, you can still be this positive, loving person, but you have to also accept that there's this darkness and this hardness,
Mm.
and that you can't just wallpaper over it. And as he recognizes that, he grows.
Yes.
And the show brings people in to consider that, I think, for themselves, or I hope it brings people in to consider it for themselves, because Lord knows it's not a show with a lot of soccer on screen. It's all about the characters and the people.
Yes. I actually wondered, as someone who's a soccer fan, does it portray soccer accurately or is it just way off?
I mean, I think they are smart in that
Okay.
they do not choose to spend a ridiculous amount of time in match situations, or find
Mm.
find creative ways to show it from the stands or from the coach's box or from close-ups on players, because I think a lot of the times you can have really great actors who are athletic but are not athletes in
Gotcha.
the same way, and then it looks forced. But I think what they are smart in that they've assembled a group of performers who are great actors and then can
Mm.
do enough of the soccer. Um, and then they focus on the people who clearly have more soccer skills and really good stunt doubles to make everything look good. And I think that that's smart,
Okay.
because you can't you can't fake it. You really can't. And unless you're going to have the budget of I, Tanya, where you can take Margot Robbie's head and put it on a professional figure skater, like, don't try, because it's just hard. And so in that way, I think that they portray it really well. And when I think about when I was coaching and running practices, I was not Ted Lasso, that's for sure. But I think that those kind of the grumbling and I don't want to do this drill, but I'm going to do the lap. I think they get some touchstones that are, I
Okay.
think, probably across the board when it comes to team sports,
Okay.
pretty pretty common.
Yeah, no, nice. So, okay, well, let me ask you this. How much time do you have?
Oh, I'm here. You
Okay,
you
cool.
have me until
Okay.
we get tired.
Okay, awesome. Awesome. Okay. Could we jump into Roy Kent? Just,
Yes.
building off, some of what you were saying around masculinity and then kind of
Yeah.
rewatching it with your father, who was a really important figure in your life and even helping you understand the construct of masculinity and maybe moving away from kind of that hegemonic understanding of
Yeah.
masculinity. I think Roy Kent is an interesting figure because on the one hand, at a surface level, you could almost say
Yeah.
that he kind of fits that toxic or hegemonic masculine sort of ideal, but he goes on his own sort of character journey,
Yeah.
maybe away from some of that. And I'm just curious if you could like riff on that.
Yeah. I fucking love Roy Kent.
I
Let
do
me just
too.
let me just open with
Do you,
that.
can you do his voice?
I just
Fuck no.
oh God. No, I think it is. I mean, his arc. I think the pairing that they do early between him and Jamie is especially
Right.
important for me as kind of this like bookends of a career.
Mm.
Um, and right, would I love Roy if we met Roy at the Jamie stage of his life? Probably not.
Yeah, I'd probably
Um,
stay away from him, honestly.
yeah, I probably like, but I think like the later thing is this idea of this is, and it becomes such a point when he's still playing of he's not as fast, he's not as strong, he has aged, and that idea of when you are somebody who's defined your entire life on the idea of your physicality,
Yeah.
losing that is terrifying.
Mm.
And he grapples with that and starts to. But I also think that what we see is that along the way, while that is the image he's continued to present, he has sought out different aspects.
Mm.
And it's only after I think he starts to recognize that there's more to him than the pitch and what people see on the pitch, that those other parts start to come out. I love him and his yoga moms. I think
Oh, isn't that
that's
great?
such a great thing. Um, Not only saying this because my girlfriend is a yoga fiend. I loved it before, but and also I think his relationship with his niece, which is just
Oh, that's incredible.
adorable, and this idea of the way they interact. I think that what's what's interesting about the point and the locus of comedy, I think too, is that we are invited to laugh
Oh yeah.
at how he acts, as opposed to his gruffness and his anger is not presented as an ideal. It's presented as, look at Roy doing this fucking thing again.
Right.
And we have to break it down, which is a subtle point, but I think is an important one.
Mm.
And then to have in season 2, where it's all about him going through this cycle of who am I now? And learning about his relationship with Keeley and being the clingy one, which I
Mm.
love also as this
Yeah.
like they're playing with tropes around how men and women in relationship has been presented in television and film, and saying
Oh,
like,
that's
yeah,
so good.
this is not how people actually act, but we're so conditioned to thinking about the women being the clingy one in these romances, that to have grumbling Roy be the
The
one who
tough
won't leave
man.
Keely. Yeah, it's like, no, I want to be around you all the time. It's like, yeah, there
Mm.
it is. Um, and I mean, even the joke of like Keely masturbating to the video of him crying,
Oh, that was
it's
awesome.
it's a joke, but it's a joke that gets to this idea of like, yeah, vulnerability is powerful in a number of
Yes.
ways.
And very sexy.
Yes, and I popcorned all over the place, but I think that for me, the scene that gets to so much of that is when Rebecca, Keely, Roy, and whoever the forgettable guy Rebecca was dating at the time are going out. And then Rebecca's asking Keely and Roy what they think. And
Mm.
Keely's kind of, she's walking around it. And Roy is like, don't you dare fucking settle. And I think it's this like, he gets the rom-com speech that no one who sounds like him or no man ever gets in the rom-com
Right.
in that same way. And what that sets up, I think, is this like season 2 for Roy, apart from career, is about dealing with relationships and dealing
Mm.
with love and expectations. And he and Keeley, I think, are so perfectly matched in that sense. Um, because they have this wonderful whirlwind romance in season 1. And then season 2 is like, to this earlier point about when shit gets real, it's like now the relationship is real. And now Roy has to figure this out. And Keeley has to figure this out, and they have to figure it out.
Oh yeah.
So Roy is just, I mean, Brett Goldstein is just such a talented
He's
human in so many
incredible.
ways, and it's a great podcast
It is
too.
a great. It is. I love his podcast.
Yeah. So
Do you find that the show is able to explore maybe like some important progressive ideas without coming across like super egoic or moralistic, which I think sadly, at least in my opinion, can happen in a lot of shows today. There are ideas and movements that I would align myself with progressively, but the way it comes across, it even turns me off sometimes. I feel like the
yeah,
show does a really good job, promoting some of that stuff, but in a way that's attractive and compelling.
yeah, right. I think to that earlier point I mentioned, right, the idea of you can't just make a show about ideas.
Right, right.
You have to find a way for those ideas to fit within a story matrix. Because otherwise, just make a PSA,
Yeah.
right? And we're not trying to watch a PSA. We're trying to watch a television show, and
Mm,
it's important to build those ideas into television and film, because so often, well, since they've become a thing, they are a way that people see reflections of culture and themselves
mm.
reflected on screen. And you need to reflect everyone, and you need to make a point to not punch down in any way at people. And you can do that and push these ideas without simply giving a lecture.
Yeah.
And I think the great thing about Ted Lasso is that the characters themselves are in conversation about these
Mm.
aspects. Nobody is perfect. Nobody is completely awful except Rupert. I think Rupert's a piece of shit, and I'm
I
fine
know
with that.
I'm on record saying I think he's the one character that's not redeemable.
Yeah, he's the only one, and I think that's the power of it in so many ways, is because it's exploring how the show itself is about striving to be better,
Yeah.
and it talks about that striving without giving space and energy to, I think, a lot of the dangerous both sidesisms, where it's like,
Yes.
yeah, so this is one thing, but this is fascism. We can't compare them. that's
Right.
that's not there. And Ted makes that choice to be like, we're going to focus on this side, and it's very
Yes.
clear that this side is bad, and we're just going to deal with the spectrum of everything else.
Mm.
And it's great. It's so many shows that do that are the best ones. And Ted, I think, especially if it can pull off a season 3 that's in line with the first 2, which I'm sure they will, because they're an obscenely talented group of people who, I'd love them to hire me in the future if anyone's listening. Um, but yeah, it's a special skill set.
Mm.
And also, I think it's about embracing the story where it is, and
Mm.
not trying to force anything onto the story that isn't inherent to it. And because if you haven't done the work to make sure that you have a rich tapestry of story to start from, you can't force it on. You have to
Absolutely.
really revise and go to the heart and go to the soul and push it out and reformat. And
Mm.
that's what, that's what any writer will tell you. Most of writing is revising
Mm.
forever into the darkness, into the
Wow.
void, until you get to the point where it's like, okay, I've gotten there.
Yeah.
Um,
Isn't
but
that a life lived as well?
yes,
Constant revising.
yes, yes, absolutely. I love that. Yeah, no, I mean, no first draft
Mm.
of whether we're thinking of a person or thinking of a script or anything, no first draft is great. It's serviceable. It's a place to start.
Mm.
And people who choose to live their lives only as the first draft of themselves, you're never going to get there. You're going to be stuck. And then you are going to become someone who you probably won't like as yourself, and that people
Wow.
probably won't want to be around, because a first draft isn't, if a first draft is not open to revision, then what are we doing?
Mm. Yeah, no, that's so good. Okay, what about Higgins? I know you don't go really deep into his character arc like in your article, but you do touch on him very briefly. Could you say some things about him? Like
Yeah,
what do you think about his character, and does he have anything to say to kind of a modern masculinity, or how to think about masculinities in the plural?
yeah. I think he, I know that, it's set in England and there are lots of British characters, but I feel like Higgins is the British character,
The British character,
the British
yes.
character, and that he is kind of this, not quite parody,
Mm,
because he's not a parody character, I don't think, but I think he's informed by a lot of these kind of classical British working men, the stiff upper lip. You go to
right.
work and you're in your tweed and you're doing this. And I think that's the purpose that he serves initially, right? Or I should say, that's what we're led to believe. That's the only purpose he serves in the beginning, right? He's kind of, he's enabled Rupert. He's just been in the system, and then Higgins breaks it down more, and he's drawn in by the Ted energy, because he's like, yeah, because what we
Mm,
see is that Higgins at home is a warm, jolly family man who loves his kids,
right.
loves his wife, loves his family, and um, wants more of that energy. And his relationship with Rebecca, which I know, I never focus on masculinity, but I have to give the shout out to just how incredible Hannah Waddingham is, and
Oh,
how
she's incredible.
just
Yeah.
Rebecca. And I think that her and Rebecca and Higgins scenes together, and I think about how they together reckon with Higgins being like, yeah, I was part of a system that failed you. And I was
Mm,
part of a system that then, expanding wide, right? So this idea is, right, it's about Higgins and Rebecca, but it's really also about how these middle management men failed women
mm,
who were being harassed or being taken advantage of by these much more powerful men, right? And that's
sure.
that to bring all of our points together. And I think that is very personal and is about the characters, but it's very easy to superimpose onto a much bigger conversation.
Sure.
And so Higgins is a figure who grows into himself by being challenged to
Mm,
recognize where he's failed. And to reach a point where, like with the Christmas episode when they have the giant team dinner, and he's just like, you're here and you can be a part of this family, because family isn't just the people who are related to each other, but he is, I think, this extender of the idea that family is about the people you choose to look out for and the people you
mm,
choose to care for. And so, patriarch Higgins in that one episode of like, here I am at the table with this family that I love.
yeah. The
Um,
Christmas episode, that was so good.
yeah, and it's a great moment for him to shine. And I don't know, I'd love another, jazz Higgins, because Higgins on the stand up bass is a lot of fun.
Oh yeah.
But right, that idea of, I think this is run through all of it, but to state it really directly, I think one of the great things about all these characters we're talking about is that um, they're all goofy in their own way,
Oh yeah.
and they have that playfulness um, that is so, it's so good to be able to see, and they're goofy with each other and they show
Sure.
love that way, which I think, at least to me, and a lot of how I experience um, my male friendships, is that warm goofiness is great, and is such a powerful way to show comfort with someone.
Mm.
And it's remarkable how many men are uncomfortable with it,
Oh yeah.
which
You know
is
what?
just a
What
shame.
that's such a good point, Devin. I mean, one of the things that's coming up for me is I feel like, and maybe this is a stereotype or I'm being maybe a little bit too unfair, but I think some versions of like modern masculinity, they're so rigid and actually take themselves so seriously. You know, all
Yeah.
there's all these injunctions and rules, and this is what it has to look like, and it's like white knuckling everything that it's like, whoa, some of the silliness of the characters in Ted Lasso, or what you were saying, just not taking themselves so seriously. What if that could be a way to kind of frame a masculinity that's playful and
Yeah.
you know, yeah, just not so fucking serious.
Yeah. It's, I mean, it's playful, right? It's playfulness without being violent, and violent not, and
Right.
I don't mean violent just in the physical violence, which is its own
Sure.
part, but I think also this
Sure.
idea of, you know, emotional and verbal violence. With when we've reached a point where the Joe Rogans and the Andrew Tates of the world are being held up as like, yeah, and it's like,
Right.
but you're, it's this pushing of this emotional, verbal, and physical violence,
Yes.
and it, why we need the goofiness, the playfulness is about, I think, that warmth and that
Mm.
compassion and tenderness. And the fact that we have culturally decided that masculinity must be about gruffness and intensity and accepting of violence is like, if I hear the phrase boys will be boys one more time in my life, I'm just, my head's gonna blow. I
Yeah.
just, it's these things that I think Ted Lasso is a part of this patchwork of
Mm.
works that I would love to become the dominant version, and, or, you know, not in terms of just like we've reached it here and this is where we stop, but like the
Right.
step that comes up so we can continue on. Because I think if we look at the arc of so much of film and television, you know, the period of John Wayne to Arnold
Mm.
Schwarzenegger, as like that is the hegemonic norm that's been put out, is a very distinct and formative time in a lot of imagery around American masculinity. And, you know, it's continued, I think, in some ways with a lot of the images around our superhero centric culture.
Oh yeah.
Um, but we're getting more than that. And I'm hopeful that the embrace of something like Ted Lasso and the embrace of similar projects will lead to more and more audiences and creators recognizing that there's a different direction, um, than Joe Rogan and Andrew Tate and that
Oh,
kind of
sure.
realm
Well,
of things.
and I know this sounds a little bit cliche, but you know, just building off of like the research of Brene Brown, I think some of the greatest strength and courage is actually the willingness for a man to be kind and gentle and not just give in to certain impulses that might lead him to kind of a violent place.
Yeah,
You know, and I think Ted Lasso really exemplifies that throughout the various
yeah,
characters. How
yeah,
difficult it is, how much strength it requires to forgive someone.
yeah, yeah. And to your earlier question about the how it portrays soccer, and right, and I think
Sure.
my little squirrel about whether or not they're showing more soccer, but the idea that, right, like these characters, even though there are ideas about this, like with Roy being defined by his playing, none of the characters are presented to us as being defined by their physical ability.
Mm.
And that to me is pivotal in how sports narratives are portrayed, because I think even for a lot of the sports stories and sports anything that I enjoy, excuse me, there is an aspect of many of the male characters are defined by their ability to swing the bat or kick a
Oh,
ball,
yeah.
and everything else is secondary. And here, that part is secondary, um,
Mm. Oh, I love
which
that.
is big.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so Devin, whether we're thinking about, you know, Ted Lasso or any other sort of male character in the show. Is there something about masculinity that the show's telling us about that maybe you could end with? You know, is there anything I
Mm.
haven't asked you that's really important to maybe highlight about either your article or the show in general?
Yeah, I think too that I love how you say that about what it's trying to highlight and tell us. And I think that, right, to some extent, now my turn for a cliche, right? Art is subjective
Mm,
in a number of ways. But I think that what it's telling us and what it's trying to present is through having an ensemble where a collection of male characters grapple and engage with issues of vulnerability, of self love, of relationships, that it is asking all of us who are watching to engage in that also, because we are seeing that that's how these characters are growing.
mm,
And that's how these stories get to carry on, because work is being done and care is being taken and given. And for the most part, grace is a part of how they are
yeah,
all operating with each other. And I think that it is telling us at the baseline that it can be hard and it can be messy, but taking those steps and making the decision to heal is just one of the most powerful things you can choose to do. And if we can all engage with that and see it for what that is, I think, we have a chance of never getting stuck as first drafts.
yeah. Oh, that's so good. You know, one of the theoretical frameworks that I utilize in therapy is something called relational cultural theory, which
Mhm.
I mean is basically just saying that people grow and develop, you know, in the context of relationships. And this is one of the things I love about Ted Lasso is just the whole concept of the diamond dogs.
Yes.
Because it shows men, woo
Oh,
woo, right, coming together to
yeah.
work out, you know, some really intimate and personal struggles in the context of a supportive community. And I just think that's so powerful. I don't believe that it has to be any kind of organized community or institutional kind of thing, but I do think for men, and this is so difficult, right? The research shows if we can find these spaces where we're connecting and talking and working things out, we don't have to stay as first drafts like you
Yes.
said. Yeah. Okay, Devin,
Yeah.
man, at some point I'd love to have you back because I want to discuss maybe a film from 1999 with you because you've
Yeah.
got some crazy background knowledge and experience and insight. And if you'd be open to that, I would love
Oh,
that.
yeah. You know where to find me. I
Okay.
would love to come back. Love talking. And,
Okay.
I'm full of so much hot air. It needs to go somewhere.
Oh, I love it, man. That's great. No, those are the best guests for sure. So
Yeah.
would you mind just ending with like the line of the podcast, which is just continue the conversation? Just
Yeah.
by saying those words?
Yeah. Continue the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you very much.